Thank you, Michael, for the great introduction. Very appreciative to get the invite to come share the story of agriculture. I've heard a lot of good news in other areas of the economy through there, except the level of commodity prices. So going to address that a little bit and attempt to provide kind of an overall of the more interesting parts of the agricultural outlook, really focus on three parts through here in the little less than 20 minutes have allotted for this portion. The first being just kind of looking at various parts of agriculture and how much that really means, how large compared to other industries agriculture, food, and food processing are. We're going to, of course, look at what we've seen, some trends at the farm level as far as incomes and ability to operate into the future. And then, of course, can't have an ag outlook presentation of any kind without touching the export markets through there. So to begin with, let's just kind of look at a few things here. It's important to look at the breadth of what I call the agriculture, food, and food processing industries within the state. If we look at just the value of the products we produce, grains, livestock, and that, and on a typical year, I don't know what a typical year looks like in Kansas, but if we attempt to look at an average year, it's about $15.6 billion. That's 5-year average there. We'll support just under 65,000 jobs. But another set of or subset of sectors that I track and like to pay a lot of attention to are really 66 different sectors out of the 532 recognized economic sectors in our economy that encompass what the inputs that make that agricultural production possible, the ag production itself, and then more importantly, from an economic standpoint, are those sectors that add additional value to our base agricultural commodities. Obviously, our meat processing, our flour mills, our food processing, all of those that really create that value, and that's where the jobs come from. And if we look at those, this is the latest data that we generated this summer. That's right at $65.7 billion, supporting just under 250,000 jobs through there. Won't spend a lot of time on this slide through here. If we look at that second column to the right, just where we're at, looking at the different multiplier effects, we look at the direct effect or the direct output of those 66 sectors, about $46.4 billion, and the number on the right through that, don't want to get too wrapped up in that, but I like to provide context, and that's just that number versus what the gross regional product was for that given year through there. And but then we look at that kind of trickle down, I hate that word as well, effect, but how that impacts the support industries for those 66 sectors. The key in those being transportation, warehousing, finance, real estate really tends to be the most impacted sectors on the input side. And then the induced effects, those jobs, that output that's created both by our agriculture and food production as well as the supporting industries through there. So all told, that's how we get to $65.7 billion. And again, with you see, obviously, this type of industry, very capital intensive through that, with the ratios being off with those providing less than 13% of the workforce through there. So what's that mean? What have we been seeing in terms of patterns? This should be no surprise, this graph here. The top line, the blue line, that is the U.S. That's the U.S. net farm income. So we're looking at from 2004 through 2018 there. So that's the U.S. Taken by the USDA. And then the bottom line, the purple line, is the Kansas. And that's actually by the Kansas Farm Management Association, which is housed within the Department of Agricultural Economics at K-State. And you see over the course of time, the trends move in the same direction. I want to point out a few pieces there. You see Kansas, we didn't enjoy, a lot of that was due to the drought. We didn't enjoy those spikes of 2012, 2013 net farm income that we saw on a national level. And on relative terms, between 2014 and 15, when the bottom really dropped out of commodity prices, we went through. You see, we have been recovering at a little stronger rate in 2016 and 17 compared to national, and that is purely a function of we've had absolute record crop yields. In 16 and 17, we produced more grain, more bushels of grain in this state than we ever have in history. The productivity level is just amazing to see what technology and innovation has, what we're able to produce on our farms and how we're able to convert that into other protein sources. So it's just amazing when that comes through. What gets really scary is if you take the price levels that we've seen in 16 and 17 and in 18, and you apply like 2012, 2011 production numbers. If you apply average yields, average productivity levels to these agricultural prices we've seen, it's very concerning. And so that's why, looking out forward, when we're approaching looking at long-term forecasts there, it can get concerning. Where we're at on prices is virtually today on the major commodities, we're virtually at the same level we were a year ago. It is, despite all the positive impacts, the negative impacts through that, we're right where we are. Long-term price forecasting to, the 2022, 2024 range has just modest increases in our base commodity prices, 5 to 15% gains, so compared to where they are now. And so it's just kind of just holding where we're at now with just modest gains. But the problem is if we apply other outside shocks, another drought, a trade type war, or anything like that, that's where we really run into problems. A little bit more visibility at the farm level. This is a great stat I love to use a lot by KFMA puts this out. This is farm loan repayment capacity. And what this ratio simply is, the top number is kind of your net income from operations off the farm, taking out family living expense, putting back your non-cash expenses such as depreciation. So it's really at the end of the year or at the end of the growing season, how much cash do I have in the bank to make my intermediate and long-term loan payments? And that's what the bottom of that ratio is. And so obviously a number greater than 1, you're in great shape. You've taken your income you need to live off the farm. You're able to make your long-term payments and then some. We can look at expanding the operation there. We can, pay down debts. It's fine. And you see, we had some great years. I mean, look at 2011 where you had nearly 50% left over of that income after you've made the payments there. That declined steadily, bottomed out, at less than 23% in 2015. And we've been recovering from that, but this is probably a little brighter picture than it actually is because just, farming like any other business, just because our data is year by year, we don't get to hit the reset button every January, right? And so what we're seeing now is coming into 2018, it's really common. You talk to people in the ag finance arena that over half of their customers or their typical customer is going to be facing the 4th consecutive year in the row of negative income or the ability to make the intermediate long-term payments. And so the only option at that point, if you're going to stay in the business, is to, hopefully, and this tends to be the case with some of the more mature farmers out there, you can take advantage of some of that equity, roll that medium and short-term debt into long-term debt, but very challenging for those newer in the industry or didn't have the opportunity for those equity gains and as the savings runs out. So that's just the picture there to keep in mind. We don't see things, the trends all point to this ratio of farm income being there, but it's the cumulative effect that I think is really starting to weigh on that. Exports. Going to take the rest of the time here. This is what's in the news the most and what I get asked about by far. This is just this actually got to give props to the Department of Commerce, Kansas Department of Commerce compiles these statistics every year, and we have a lot more visual on drilling down on what that on the ag side is. But you look in 2017, kind of major industry classification, and I put together agricultural commodities and food because this roughly aligns with those 66 sectors I spoke to before. Through that, you look in 2017, about a little over a third of our exports out of the state that went international, $3.8 billion. We're in those categories there. You know, a lot of that's a function of price. I think 2014 would have been our number one in terms of just value of exports, but again, that's just a function of price. You see other industries, I like to keep industrial and electrical machinery at just under 9%. I keep an eye on that because there's a lot of great agricultural equipment manufacturers in the state that export internationally there. Obviously, aircraft and parts is the largest standalone industry when you look at for exports through there. And what do we export? You know, there's 13 different items that make up the bulk, that make up 92% of our exports in this arena. But the top three really are 80%, or close to 83% is just raw meat, and then our grains, cereal grains and oil seeds. That's what we're really good at exporting. There's some interesting things on here. Jeremy mentioned before, it's been fun to watch chocolate exports. That is a direct function of the Mars plant in Topeka there. So they were up to number 7, 19.5 million in exports. And there's some other interesting pieces there. But by and large, a majority of our agricultural exports are more of our raw products through there. Where do we send things to? And this is an interesting slide because we read more into this. You will find this. So this is our ag export ranking. You know, I want to be careful through that because you look at Kansas's largest trading partner overall is Canada. But we look at in 2017 where that holds through. And Mexico, by and large, they take our exports. It is you see the numbers there. It's just baffling there. And so we do. It's really good to hear good news. I celebrated as much as anyone, being a farmer, a cattle producer myself, as well as working in the ag policy arrangement that, when that first bilateral agreement was made with Mexico, I celebrate it. But again, that was just to keep, I hate to call it the status quo, but it really was, because we already had a free and open market system with Mexico with no tariffs, no duties on a vast majority of all our agricultural products. And this agreement just allowed us to keep that. The USMCA. Same with on the, the Canada side. It's really good to get the other piece of that puzzle. I do see I'm looking forward to diving down more as more information is available on USMCA on the Canadian side, because some of their dairy practices have been ruled, unfair, and has some corrections in that on some tariffs that could have some positive impacts on the dairy industry in the state. And have to talk about Japan there. They continue. If you look at total Kansas exports, altogether, Japan is barely, among the list. It barely makes a top 5 of our markets in a given year total. But for ag, it is very important. And I look at lost opportunities. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that we're no longer part of. It's just a local example. Cargill here in town, if they're shipping meat into Japan, they're probably an average tariff rate of 34% now. Members of TPP are at 16 to 17% is where we're at, and that is something that was lost out on. Some other emerging type markets that excite me a lot are, you see Nigeria has just continued to purchase more of our products up through there. Some other African countries, Algeria and Indonesia have really came don't want to say out of nowhere. There's been a lot of great partnerships built up in that, but that is another emerging market, a lot of potential consumers there. And I will talk about China last here. Number 6, China is a very important market for ag. I don't want to downplay it, but I think I always like showing this slide that because China gets what 99% of the press, that all we hear about is China, China, China. And in agriculture, I'm not discounting. We need that relationship. It's through that, but it's not among the most important. So obviously we'll hope, because just that spillover into our markets and what that does to the infrastructure, and that is causing a lot of problems for Kansas agricultural producers, and with it not being one of our largest customers. And so it's a big piece there. Just kind of a last thing on this, how important is trades? These are just base commodities. You look at wheat in 2017, we exported $835 million worth. That's 62.5% of our wheat was exported. Kansas continues to be, we're the top wheat producer. Sometimes we'll fall to 2 as a function of weather there, but for wheat is absolutely vital. We look at corn. We've have the good fortune. We have a very robust livestock industry, very robust ethanol industry within the state, and the export markets aren't as important to the corn. And as I'll allude to here and on the last slide as well, I'd much rather be exporting that corn in terms of protein or in terms of ethanol than I would just our base commodity there. Soybeans, 24%. Grain sorghum, Milo, Kansas, by far the largest producer of grain sorghum in the United States, and trade is there, but looking at the percentages you see there, it is less. We have more of a domestic demand for that product. So what do I see here finally looking ahead? The outlook for production ag side is pretty dismal, if not just kind of keeping where we're at now, barely going. It's not good, but we're not in uncharted territory yet. We've seen these downturns in the past. The most recent one gets compared to a lot was the 80s. So we've seen this level before. I see, I don't think we can count on just better increases in productivity and better prices to pull us out of this as a state. I think other marketing opportunities, such as just continuing to find ways to further process the commodities before they leave the state. If we can turn our base production into a more high-value product, we keep the jobs, we keep the infrastructure here, it does some great things. We need to continue to explore these emerging markets. I love like I was mentioned, Algeria, Indonesia, the Philippines, Taiwan evidently is a very, very good market going forward for that. And then just ensure that we maintain our existing markets, because this level of declining net farm incomes has happened with record export numbers, so any additional shocks were absolutely there. And then the last piece that you could sit up here and talk for the longest time on is that if I look at the outlook looking ahead, what's holding us back more than any other thing I've mentioned here is the lack of labor. It's our biggest constraint in the state as far as growth, and it is across all facets of the industry there. Whether if I'm in a feed yard in Garden City, Kansas, or if I'm in a tech or a distribution company in the Kansas City area, that comes up more often than anything. And I know we're not immune to that as an industry. Other industries are seeing that as well. I was actually talking with Michael and Charlie this morning, and the banking and the media industries as well are seeing similar challenges. So that's one I want to keep on the horizon, of the importance of having attractive communities for our domestic and foreign workers to come in for. So anyway, thank you very much. Thanks.